very disappointed with a number of Mr. Clayton's answers. It's not in many ways reflective of the person that I've worked with over the years. But I worry that there seems to be this criteria that this administration is putting out about no one who's put up for any position can tell the truth about 2020 election. That's deeply unsettling.
You heard it. The vice chair of Senate Intel did not come away from the Jay Clayton nomination hearing feeling good about it, which is a big deal because, as you have heard him say on this very show, Senator Warner saw Jay Clayton as a more than decent choice for D&I. So what happened? Joining us, MS Now senior national security reporter David Rohde, MS Now congressional reporter Michael Schnell, and former FBI special agent and MS Now national security and intelligence analyst Christopher O'Leary. Michael, Senator Warner has been on the show multiple times talking about Jay Clayton and saying that he was a decent choice. Tell me what he did not hear today.
Yeah, and Katie, that's what's making this hearing so fascinating. Was going into it, it was the understanding that Jay Clayton could actually pick up a number of Democratic votes. You have to remember, he'll be taking the reins from Bill Pulte, who Democrats said had zero experience, was completely unfit for the job. Jay Clayton previously led SDNY, previously led the SEC. They saw him as a formidable candidate, but that all changed today as he was questioned about the results of the 2020 election and whether or not he could say Joe Biden was the certified winner versus the actual winner. Take a listen to some of that questioning.
Do you deny that Joe Biden won the 2020 election?
Senator, I'm not an election denier. Joe Biden was certified as the president of the United States.
Can you tell me why Joe Biden was certified as the winner of the 2020 election?
I'm going back to my constitutional law here, but I don't want to continue to have a debate about this, but I believe he had the most electoral votes.
So he won the election.
Who won the 2020 election?
Like I said, I'm not going to get into that with you.
But you do have an obligation to be honest and forthright with the committee.
Is anything that I just said not honest or forthright?
Yes, you're not being honest or forthright. Who won the 2020 election?
I think I've answered the question. We can keep doing this.
Well, we're going to keep doing it because you're not being honest and forthright.
I'm not going to engage in the theater.
And Katie, this went on a number of times during a number of different questions from Democrats. Jay Clayton unable to say that Joe Biden won the election and just saying that he was certified. And this isn't just a litmus test for any old cabinet nominee. It's for somebody who is going to be able to oversee some elections, including the November midterm elections. When Bill Pulte was first appointed acting director of national intelligence, David Rohde and we dug into this. A lot of Democrats said they were concerned that whoever is overseeing the intelligence community could cast doubt on the results of the midterm elections if Republicans lose. They pointed to the fact that Tulsi Gabbard, the predecessor in this role, she had backed President Trump's claims that the 2020 election was stolen. She was part of that FBI raid at Fulton County, Georgia, that took some voting records. So this has been an acute concern for Democrats when talking about this important role of Director of National Intelligence. And to the point you made before, Katie, Democrats saw Jay Clayton as somebody who they could actually support. But I was talking to one Democratic senator after the hearing who said they thought he lost some of that Democratic support today with this line of questioning about the 2020 election.
David, I thought the way Senator Mark Kelly asked it was good. Why did he get certified? And he still could not answer it. Why is it a big deal? I mean, say we accept the premise that they can't say that Joe Biden won because Donald Trump will get angry and kick him out. They just are not allowed to do it. It's part of the game when you sign up to be Donald Trump's anything. They just can't. So if we accept that premise, why is it still important? Why is it still a serious breach for him not to admit in front of Congress that Joe Biden won the 2020 election?
Because we are a democracy, because his oath should be to the Constitution and upholding the laws of this country. And if Joe Biden got the most votes in 2020, he won the election. And it was just startling to be in that room today and watch it. And the problem is that we've seen this over and over with nominees to Donald Trump. Apparently, they fear him so much they will not say the words, Joe Biden won the 2020 election. And what's extraordinary, there were two other incidents that related to this. He was asked about the subpoenas of the New York Times reporters, which seemed very rushed. And what was very unusual, Democratic senators pointed out, was that they were delivered at their houses, which is not the way you do it. You deliver them usually at people's offices. And he just said, I am not going to get into the process and the details. He signed off on those subpoenas. And then another great point that was raised, he was the one, his office carried out the convictions of the president of Honduras, the ex-president. He was convicted of shipping tons, literally tons, thousands of pounds of cocaine to the United States. President Orlando Hernandez received a full pardon from President Trump. So when Clayton was asked about that case and if he had any issues with the president pardoning this person that Clayton had convicted, he said the president's power of pardon is absolute. And so it's just this theme of fearing Donald Trump.
So the question I think that leads to is if they are willing to look the other way on years of work to convict somebody like the former president of Honduras, if they are willing to look the other way and swallow their pride and not admit the obvious truth that Joe Biden won the election, which I'm sure they all know, if they're willing to do that to get into these roles, should we assume that on a baseline they are going to be a functional and perhaps adept DNI? Is Jay Clayton going to be a decent DNI ultimately, regardless of what he has to say in public? Or should we be worried that if he's willing to subjugate himself on this stuff, Chris, that he will be willing to do a whole lot more that Donald Trump asks of him?
Well, I think the latter. I think, him refusing to answer the simple question, that President Biden won the 2020 election is that litmus test. Just to be frank, if he was a normal employee trying to get hired and screened to join the intelligence community, he would fail that vetting based on his combative and evasive nature today, his lack of knowledge, seemingly, of the intelligence community, his preparedness. And I'll just tell you, I worked in the intelligence facility where the DNI is based out of, and you cannot enter that complex without having a polygraph. Clearly, if Mr. Clayton was to undergo a polygraph today, he would have had deception indicated because he's not being truthful or forthcoming, because he's demonstrating that his loyalty to President Trump supersedes his commitment to the Constitution and loyalty to the American people. So then the fear is, what is he willing to do with that if he's confirmed? What's his intent? Is he going to support this ludicrous assertion that there's some kind of corruption in our electoral system? People are comparing him to Bill Pulte, and sure, he might be slightly better, might be less offensive, he might be less alarming, but is he truly the best candidate that we, the American people, can put forward to be in charge of all of our intelligence? Because, frankly, he just doesn't seem to be.